Hi, good morning. Welcome to another episode of Video Development Tips. Today we're going to look at creating your very first migration with EF Core. We're going to start from a very fresh project, create some tables, get the migration out there for initial one, update the tables, and apply the migration. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to be in VS Code for most of this, and what we're going to do is we're going to say create a new project. So I'm going to do a .NET new web API. I'm going to call it first migration. And this will all be on GitHub, and I'll have a link in the description for this. All right, so it's restoring, it created it, so let's go ahead and open this. We're going to say code, open this current folder, and reload it into this current window. All right, here we go. So we have our project created. You know what, actually, this was one directory too high. Let me change directory into the first migration. All right, now let's open it in code. All right, so pretty basic stuff here we have. We have our sample project, .NET Core 2.2. Nothing, no surprises here, simple startup, one controller, values controller. So let's go ahead and start creating our models for our database. So we're going to do a new folder. We're going to call it data. For this project, everything's going to be in the same project. So as our data, let's create our first order, our first table. We're going to call it order. So we're going to give it a namespace, first migration dot data, and we'll make it a class, call it order as a file name. And what will this have? We'll have a few properties. We'll have a integer for a key, just to keep it simple. Most likely you probably want to use a GUID or something, but that could be a different video. Next thing, we're going to give this order a name. And for this simple project, that might be it. We'll eventually have a collection of items, but I'll show that here after we create our items. So let's go ahead and call this, let's do this a little bit differently here. Let's go over here and new file. We'll do item.cs. We're going to do the same namespace, first migration.data. Give it a few properties here, an ID, and then we'll have a string name, order name, or item name. First, I need to put this in a class. Let's format this document. All right, so now the relationship I want to show here is that an order has many items, and the item belongs to one order. So let's go ahead and give this a reference to order. So we're going to come in here and we're going to do a public int order ID, a reference to the primary key on order. And then over here, we're going to give it a virtual iCollection of order. And we're going to call it orders. All right, so I'm freak out because I'm missing a using. There we go. So now we have a reference to order. So I mess it up. That should just be a single order. A order has many items, not item has many orders. All right, there we go. That's better. So now in EF Core, since we're going to use how they do their naming, it'll automatically know, since we have order object as order ID, it'll make that relation for us. But we're also going to show how you can do that inside the model builder. So over here, we need to add the collection. So we'll have a public virtual iCollection of item, and we'll call it items. So same freak out because we're missing our using. And another thing we're going to do, we're going to add a constructor here for order. And we're going to set items to an empty list. This can typically be a hash set, but for this, since I'm going to have duplicate items, we'll just say it's a list. And why we're doing this is so we never have to deal with null collections in our code. It's just going to be a little bit more defensive coding, and that will help us out when we're doing our checks. We never check for null, we only have to check for empty. All right, so now we have our two tables here. We have our item, which has a order, and our order, which has items. So now let's go ahead and create our context. We're going to call it testDB context. So similar thing, namespace, we're going to do first migration.data. Then we're going to do a class, testDB context. And this is going to implement DB context. No, this DB context. Don't give me autocomplete there. We have to import the using. So now let's set up our constructors. We're going to just do a couple. We're going to do an empty one. And we're also going to do one where we pass along the options. This is going to be the one we're mainly going to use for our dependency injection. So let's go ahead and do a base, and we're going to pass along our options, which I'm going to make right here. DB context options, options, and that will satisfy that. So what's going to happen is in our startup, we'll eventually configure it and just pass the options along to our DB context. What we're going to do is we're going to create our two DB sets. This is going to help create our tables. So these are just properties. So we're going to create a virtual DB set for item. Let's call it item. And then we're going to create a virtual DB set for order. Let's call it order. And then what we're going to do is we're going to override the on model creating. Actually, what's going to be easier, just if we go to definition here and we search on model creating, we can just see that this is something we can override. Let's just take it and put it right here, get rid of that, and just override here. What we're going to do is we're just going to set up some relationships here just to show how you can use the Fluent API to do this. So we're going to say model builder entity, and we're going to say the item entity. We're going to say .has one. It has one order with many, and this is with many on the order. So if we look here, we'll see e.items, and we're going to say has a foreign key, and we're going to say that was the order ID, and we're also going to say we're going to have a custom constraint name. This is so we can have it in senior database. So foreign key constraint on item and order. All right, so it should already pick this up. You don't need this because NT Framework knows how to handle seeing this and this, but I just want to show the Fluent API. So now this will actually allow us to create our first migration. So to create a first migration, the first thing we're actually going to need is we're going to need to tell it what provider we're going to use. So we'll just do another override here before we do the dependency injection and stuff. So if we look at our DB context again, and we look for our configuring, you'll see an on configuring. Let's just take this real quick, put it right here, and make similar last time, override it. what we're going to say is, hey, on the option builder, we're going to tell you to use SQL Server. And we'll need the connection string. I'm going to cheat and grab my connection string from over here. And then we're going to say, hey, base dot on configuring, here's the options. All right, so now if we open up our terminal and we go into the project level, okay, we're already in the project level, we can do a .NET EF migrations. We're going to add our initial migration. So it's thinking, and the build failed. Let's see why the build failed. So let's do a .NET build. Item does not contain definition for order, and no access to the method order. Did I forget to save something? I forgot to save this. Let's try it again. Okay, it built. Let's add the migration again. I'm used to autosave, and that was not autosaving. All right, so let's see what this made for us. It's nothing surprising here. We have our initial migration. This is where on the up, it creates our tables, and then if it fails on the down, it will undo everything it did. And here's our current snapshot. So every time you add a migration, it will change the snapshot, and it will add two files here. It will add a up down. So that will happen on the up is when it's adding the migration, and if the migration fails, the down is when it takes back all of its changes. And here's the designer. So let's go ahead and dependency inject our database. And if you want to see, this actually has not created our database yet. Because if you remember in our connection string, we called it testDB. So the migration did not create this yet. We still need to create it. So let's go ahead and dependency inject our context. So over in services, let's add DB context. And we're going to add testDB context. I think that's what it's called. TestDB context. And we're going to go ahead and give it some options. So we're going to say options dot use SQL Server, and let's go ahead and get the connection string from our configuration. So we're going to call it connection string, and let's import our usings. All right, so let's go create this property inside our app settings. Let's go grab our connection string again. Actually, you don't need your connection string in there for that initial one because there was no database, but we're saying comment this out because we're going to use it again here shortly. Now we have our app settings.json, we have our connection string. Now we're dependency injecting our context. So let's go ahead and use the context in our values controller. And we're just going to kind of edit this pretty roughly here just so we can see it working. Let's import our usings. Let's initialize this field. What we're going to do here, let's just get rid of this real quick. We're going to say okay, or no, okay. We're going to do an async task, and we're going to do an action result just to make this quick. Instead of returning this, we're going to return context dot order. We're going to include the items. And we're going to say dot to list async. Await context. What do you like about this? Oh, let's return this as OK as action result. All right. So now we'll use the DB context to inject it. You should not be using DB context in the controller. We're just using this for an example. This is low level of concept for the controller. All right, now that I have the disclaimer out of the way, let's go ahead and let's also see the database so we can get some dummy data in here so we can just see it working. Let's do a new file. And let's call it testdb initializer. Namespace, first migration dot data, public static class, testdb initializer. We're just going to create a public static void initialize. Again, all I want is a context, and I will add some stuff to your database. So context dot order dot add. We're going to add a new order with a name being order 1 and items equals new list of item. And we're going to create a new item. I just don't like this. Add the using. We're going to add a new item here, which has a name of item 1. Very creative here. And then we're going to say context dot save changes. All right, now when we call this on startup, we should be able to see our database. So now here comes where we're going to apply the migration. So we have a dependency injected. Let me do a save all before I mess something up. So now we have everything here. We are saying, hey, on the configure, here's our DB context, uses connection string, boom. What we need to worry about now is we need to worry about making sure we apply the migration and we initialize our database. So what we do here is I'm going to mess with our program.cs. So the build, what build is going to do is create web hosts, and it's going to use startup and call .build. What that's going to do is it's going to actually create, it's actually going to call into our startup class and do configure services. After that, we run it, host.run, and that is actually going to run our website. So the configure, this app is called by the runtime. So in between configuring and before running, we are going to apply our migration to our database and then initialize it, seed it. So what we need to do is we need to get our context. So the first thing I need to do is I need to set up a scope. So using scope equals host.services.create scope. I think, yeah. I like that. Okay. What we're going to say is we're going to grab our service because this gave us a service scope. So we're going to say var context equals scope dot get service, and we're going to say get, no, this should be service provider, and then we get service. We're going to say get test DB context, and we need to import that using, and what we're going to say is, hey, context, go ahead and on the database apply the migrations. Migration. Is that it? No, it's migrate. Right? Oh, crap. There we go. Yes. Okay, migrate. We're going to say, hey, go migrate the database. That's the thing to do is I check the migration folder. First thing, connect to the database. Check the table it creates from the migration. It's called like EF migration history or something like that. We'll look at it in a second. See which migrations were applied. And if the migrations weren't applied in that folder, they apply the new ones. Since the database is not even created yet, what it's going to do is actually going to apply that first migration and create the database. So let's go ahead and run that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, test DB initializer, initialize, so we can get some dummy data in there. One thing that we'll run into when we run this and we try to get the data is it's going to give us a error with null dependency, circular dependency handling on the JSON from the data because they reference each other. This really won't be an issue if you use like view models and things like that. But since I'm returning that order directly from the controller, it will mess up. So I'm just going to go to startup, and I'm going to say dot I don't remember what that is. Let me look that up real quick. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit and go grab this code. I can't remember what it was, so I had to go grab it. I don't really use this very often, but here we go. So what we're saying is on the JSON options for our MVC, for our serializer settings on the reference loop handling, we're saying ignore it, so we don't get into this loop of this object references object, nested object, etc. So now, I think we have everything. So now if we run this, we're going to see a few things happen. We're going to see the migration happen, which is going to create the database, create the tables, create the relationships, create the constraints, and then once that's done, we're going to initialize it. So if everything we did was correct, when I hit run, we should see all that. So let's go ahead and make this bigger and watch this. So, no errors, yes, that's good. All right, awesome, it worked. So let's go look at what happened here. So we're using SQL Server Provider, and we create a database, testDB. We're going to alter this database. We just created a table for the EF migration history, which was the one I was talking about, to make sure like we can see what migrations were applied, which ones were not, which ones were new, etc. And then it started actually, creating our tables here. And see their database. So let's go ahead and end that. Let's go ahead and end this. Actually, let's go look at the database. So if we go over here and refresh this, here's our test DB. As you can see, it was created. And if we look at the order, select that 1000, you'll see there's one order. So let's go ahead and go to query it. All right, Chrome, what are you doing? Oh, I didn't hit the. All right. Let's go ahead and query it. Why can't I edit this page? Hey, morning, John. / API values. All right. Let's go. All right, so here we are. Let's refresh this page. You can see we have one order. So now with that all working, let's go and change one of our tables and apply the migration. So if we go over to order, let's say we want to add a new field for special instructions. We're going to add that property here. We're going to do a get set on it. And now with that, what we're going to do, all we need to do is we need to go back into our TestDB context, tell what provider to use, and then we're going to do a .NET EF migrations add. This time we're going to call it special instructions. So we added. We should see two new files in here. That's CS and designer file. As you can see in this new one, all it did was it said add column, special instructions, drop column, etc. So now if we run our website again, we will see this migration applied. As you can see right here, it's checking the history and then adding the column, and then we reseed our database again. So now if we come over here, refresh, we should see in our order table we have a new column called special instructions, which is good. If we select top 1000 over here, you'll see we have two migrations, initial and special instructions. Now if we go over here and refresh this, we will have an empty null field for special instructions. So that's how you start with EF Core migrations. All right, thanks for watching.